Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HTML All the Things podcast. This episode is number 2, and it's appropriately named Where to Start. In this episode, we're going to be talking about just that, where to start, but more from a technical perspective rather than the business side of things. We'll probably have a more business-centric episode in the future. But as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Mike. How's it going?
Hello.
Hello. And so we'll be going through a bunch of languages and libraries and tools and everything else. Like if you read anything on any sort of web design, like Reddit or news or anything, you can see just a ton of tools and a ton of everything that's coming out all the time, and people saying, oh, this is broken, this is not, this is whatever. So we're going to be going through all of that and kind of kick her off. But we have 5 segments, or 6 segments actually in the show. We have a special segment at the end. Our 5 segments in the beginning, plus our bonus segment. Number 1 is going to be Mike's beginnings. Number 2 is going to be my beginnings. Number 3 is going to be libraries and frameworks. Number 4 is going to be when to choose a pre-made solution. And number 5, well, I guess there's only 5. Number 5 is going to be web news. And that's going to be, we're going to try to coin a better term than that, but we're going to do a little segment piece on that, and we'll probably talk about that when we get there. But I think we should kick things off right away, and let's start with Mike's beginnings. So go ahead, Mike, and tell us how you got started in this field.
Okay, well, I think like most people, started in high school a little bit. So we had a business class in high school, and that pretty much just taught us very simple HTML, barely any CSS. And that was it for high school, unfortunately for us. We had kind of a poor tech program. Our one software class that we had in high school just ended up being a bunch of people landing their computers together and playing games. And I had other courses to take during that time, so I couldn't take it anyway. The other thing, actually, I don't know if people remember this, but Geocities. So they're free web pages you could create on Geocities with kind of like a website builder. That was, I think that might have been before high school, and that was kind of like my first foray into creating something and seeing it live on the web, which was cool for me. So yeah, after that, I went into college with Matt. So we took this internet tech course that we talked about in the previous podcast, actually. Again, really simple start with HTML, CSS, a little bit of JavaScript. Not really much sustenance in that course as well. It gave us a good base, but nothing else. And really, we were focusing on IT at that point, so I wasn't even thinking about web design. I think what really started my technical progression was our first large work project. So when we got a client that needed a page of like approximately 15, maybe even 20 pages, we kind of had to do everything from scratch because we didn't know what we were doing due to only having one course in college. And we came up with a quote, and eventually the client chose to do it with a template because it was going to be a little bit faster. He needed it, what was it? Like we thought we could do it in like a couple months, and the client's like, no, we need it like 2 weeks. So we're like, okay, let's get this template and speed things up. And unfortunately, the template actually made it harder for us because it wasn't very good, and it wasn't too modifiable. And due to the client's requirements, we had to really go in and rewrite a lot of the template code and write pages from scratch. And it was a little bit difficult because of that. Make it responsive as well. It was responsive, but as soon as you start modifying anything, I think most people know with templates and frameworks that responsivity comes as a problem with that kind of stuff. So later on, once we actually made that site and the client liked it, a month goes by, and they're like, you know what, we need to edit this ourselves. And we kind of went to them, we're like, listen, we have a contract with you guys. We told you that we're not going to be able to, for the money that you paid, you're not going to be able to edit it yourself. It's not a CMS. And they're like, well, we need to edit it ourselves. So we had to make up a whole other a whole other contract and upgrade the site, which kind of got us into a CMS framework that we'll talk about later. It's called Couch, but it's pretty cool for actually making a static web page into a customizable web page. So we had a lot of experience with that right off the bat, and considering it was like a 15, 20 page site at that point with constantly being updated almost daily with new information, news, and other industry requirements. So that was kind of the start of our web, I would say, my web development side. And then we moved on to doing projects together with Matt for Digital Dynasty, which started with just a regular Chrome extension. We did a program called List by Design, which was really just a bookmarks organizer, and you could save your bookmarks into different lists and reorganize those lists and add notes to each link, add like a price even, so you can make a shopping list with pricing. So there was a lot there, and since we were doing Chrome applications and we were just starting out, it was just in pure JavaScript. So I had to learn how to like programmatically reorder list elements in pure JavaScript, create element, remove elements, like document involved, and I had to learn how to save. This was through the Chrome APIs, but still, like, it was very similar to local storage. Actually, much more difficult, because I don't know if anyone's programmed in Chrome before, but for Chrome apps, it's asynchronous saving and asynchronous loading, which asynchronous anything puts a lot of complications on a project. So you have to get callbacks. So I had to learn callbacks really quick. So really, that was a big foray into JavaScript for me, and I think we released it and it was successful. There was no glitches as far as we could tell, and the people using it seemed fine with it, which is great for confidence boost at least. So after that, we went into a game for Chrome, a Chrome app application game, which was like idle clicker. So just like kind of like cookie clickers, kind of game like that. It was called Clicks to Riches. It's still available, actually. We made it free now on the App Store. We can link it below in the notes. So pretty much that got me into timing, because a lot of it was, active timing. So while the person's there, you're making a bunch of money depending on all the different modifiers. And when you close the application, you have to record when the application is closed, when an application opens, do a calculation. How much did he have? How much does he have now? Pop up a message. So it was a lot of timing code, which was really interesting for me at the time, and as well as working with a graphical user interface. So you had to modifying updates, since it was a single page app. That was another first foray into a single page application with a lot of moving parts. We were working with a designer at that time, which was also an interesting combination. So that was really my base. So these projects were my base for learning how to code. As it went forward, we got new clients and it kept going. But really, up to that point, that's when I got the confidence and moved forward with keep going into the back-end development as I'm more specially known for now.
And I think the one thing that you mentioned there is especially important. When I believe it was our first client, when our first client decided that they had changed vision and they wanted their site from static to dynamic. Mm-hmm. I think it's really important for people to realize that. I guess that'd be more of a business point, but when you make a project, if you are making it such that it's so one way, so it's so static that making it dynamic is totally out of the question, then maybe you should be looking for something else that could make it more flexible in the future. Like, obviously it'll still require a technical change, like what we had to do, but it's not like we made it in, I don't know, some sort of program, like some sort of service that was offered. And then they're like, hey, we want a CMS. And it's like, oh, we have it on this site builder and we can't do that. You know what I mean? So ours was open enough that, we could look for a solution. And I mean, you also mentioned it was quite difficult, but that was one of our first anyway. I can't remember if it was the first, but one of our first forays into this market in general. So it is kind of standard practice, I would say, to trying to get stumped. But again, you just kind of prevail. You just kind of go through it and you kind of figure it out. And that's, and we did. So.
Yeah, we did. And we might have made a mistake in choosing to do it static off the start, but we did offer a CMS to them, and it was cost prohibitive at the time. Later on, they had to pay even more than they would have had to pay if we were designing a CMS at the start. So again, it was almost a mistake on both the client and our faults, and we've learned as we go to get better requirements from the client. And I think like just knowing what would have had to been updated. Like I was updating that site twice, 3 times a day sometimes because of how quick that business was moving. So obviously knowing that I would have to update it 3 times a day, I would have started with the CMS and I would have said, listen, there's no way we can do this as a static site because you would have to pay me on a retainer to just sit there and update it. So you live, you learn kind of thing.
Absolutely. And that's another business point, would be that we kind of learned, like it's more business and technical, I suppose. It's you're learning a template, not a template in terms of like a traditional Bootstrap template, but you're learning a template in which how you conduct business, I guess is the best way to put it. And so like we learned like, we need to be more upcoming in the beginning maybe, and we need to maybe push a bit to say, hey, we really think you should have an editable thing. We really think you should have a CMS. Yeah. And
we that type of thing. We know best most of the time for the client, and we have to do our job to prove to the client why they need to use the technologies that we offer. And we didn't do that as well at the start, and we're getting better at it now. I would say we're still probably not experts at that section, but I think we're moving to that field.
Well, it's an ever learning experience, and like with us only having ultimately a few years in the field, we definitely aren't like the biggest experts, but this is sort of like what we've learned so far. And you slowly start developing templates for your work. Like, I'm doing, this site for this size of business. Therefore, I'm going to do these 4 things, even without asking. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to like set up HTTPS. I'm going to prepare this. I'm going to prepare that. So you sort of like, as you go through working with, it's usually like, for us anyway, it's like client size. It's like, are they small business? Are they big? Are they medium? Like, what are they? We decide, okay, these guys will want a really like big project proposal. These guys, maybe usually the smaller businesses, they don't want that. They want a wireframe. They don't even want anything else, and they want you just to move on. So that's something to really kind of keep in mind.
Yeah. And I think we'll talk about that later in a more business-centered episode, but
absolutely.
It's good to bring it up now. So I think, Matt, it's your beginnings now.
Yeah,
give us an insight into Matt Lawrence.
Well, again, sort of very similar to you, I had a very brief education in high school in web development. I believe I don't even think we were using CSS, or if we did, it was very, very small, and we were only using HTML for the most part. And we were even using things like HTML marquees, and that was like our animation. Mm-hmm. So as old as that is, like web devs today probably don't even know about web marquee or HTML marquees. But that's scrolling like text, that's like your text scrolling across the screen, and that was like big. That was big money. It was like, oh man, like my banner has moving text back then. So that they're dating myself a little bit, but I basically from there I went to like you said the college program, the web tech, and we HTML, CSS. We also did MySQL. I don't know if you mentioned that. We also did MySQL, and I would say that the MySQL was actually okay because. I mean, we mentioned in the previous episode, but we had some server admin courses that kind of reinforced that part. But the HTML and CSS was definitely, it was a one course, so it was kind of lacking just because it was only one. Mm-hmm. So, so that's kind of the formal training. And then we kind of just got thrown into it. So in one of our first projects as well, and this is a different one, we had to work with Dreamweaver, and we mentioned this in the previous episode, and it was like really, really kind of hectic. And I kind of, from there, I just started learning user interfaces, like especially since Dreamweaver is a visual tool, I just started using user interfaces and started trying to like understand them and understand, at this resolution, the navbar becomes like a navicon or a hamburger menu, and like I started understanding that type of stuff, and I really focused on it because I realized, hey, like if we want to do anything, we need a way to display it. And if we want a website, people always think, I want to see the website. They don't go to a developer and go, hey, can you make me an algorithm and then show me the code? And so my kind of mentality was, since you were going more back end, it was like, well, okay, this is kind of a no-brainer. I should go more user interface because I'm interested in it anyway. And I should really kind of focus on that. And one of the things that I focused on was just trying to learn the web flow. Like there's like a way that like there's a way that the page kind of flows. It's kind of hard to understand, but it's I guess a lot of times it's described as document flow. There may be a technical term for it that I'm unaware of. And so like I just kind of kept like beating the crap out of it. And what I ended up focusing on was Navbars. So I threw myself into Navbars because they're rather complex. Like if you think about it, in terms of a user interface, the first thing you see on most pages is like the banner up the top, and then that either includes the navbar or the navbar is right below it. Mm-hmm. And the navbar is quite complex as it changes types, and it'll go to a list, and it'll be vertical, horizontal. And so I really kind of focused on that. And that was kind of how I just like hit the ground running. And I did those in plain HTML, CSS, and JS when needed. And I just kind of hit the ground running and kept like beating navbars into the ground. I don't know if you remember, but a couple of our, I'm going to say probably our first 5 projects, I was just like spending the first 3 days on the navbar.
Oh yeah, I remember.
because I would just like jump right into it, and I really wanted to like make sure it was right. But that ended up being very valuable because I learned like, oh, JS can do this. Oh, I can transition this. This is how to make it disappear at a breakpoint. Mm-hmm. And then those are kind of concepts that are used throughout, designing the pages. And then, so from there, I first focused on block model, and then we moved to Flexbox. And Flexbox was, I'd say, we started adopting that more like a year ago-ish, because we've been kind of on like a variety of projects. So we did a lot of block model, and we worked on a lot of older sites, which is, I guess, kind of why we focused on block model before. Mm-hmm. We were on maintaining a lot of older sites. And then we started moving to Flexbox, and then now we're sort of like fully Flexbox, and then looking to Grid now as well. Mm-hmm. And then to mention the same thing that you did as well, Google products, so List by Design. So one of the challenges was we wanted a material design feel, which is, of course, Google's design system, if you will. And we wanted like that feel, and we had to keep it within HTML, CSS, and JS. I believe pretty much pure all of those, to make sure that it worked as an extension nicely. And we had the most experience with it at that time. So like that. And so we just kept going through like iteration after iteration. And we had like a group of friends testing our application and just like kind of giving it to them, being like, hey, well, how's this? Hey, how's this? And if you look, I think we have versions of it saved. Version like, I'm going to assume like maybe internally it's like version 5 is actually the one in production right now. Mm-hmm. Version 1 through 5 is like such night and day. Like there was no navbar, there was no transitions, no nothing, and it's like such a big thing. So I think that's important to mention for a getting started episode is if you don't know what the UI is going to fully look like, or you're kind of like stumbling through it, one of the key things to do is to hit the objective. So it would be like, we need 4 lists. So I'd make a list switcher, like a UI for that. And then, we need like list items. I'd make the list items. We need icons. I'd make the icons. And then slowly, as you kind of go, we sort of started changing it. And we didn't even use a wireframe or a design for List by Design. It was just sort of our foray into developing for Google products, Google Chrome, and Google Apps specifically. And then we moved to our actual Google app, which is out in the store right now, which is Clicks to Riches. And Clicks to Riches, like you said, is our game. And that was kind of an interesting project because we worked with an artist on that because it is a game. And a lot of the elements weren't, blocks, or they weren't just squares or circles or something I could generate in CSS. A lot of them were actual art pieces. So a lot of like, I would generate the square and then I'd have to like make the background color this texture, but you'd have to like make sure it fit well and looked nice. So that was sort of like an interesting challenge. And I designed the user interface alongside the artist because we did this project in a couple of weeks. So we designed it like right alongside the artist, and then so we were like in constant contact in the same office space, working with them. And so that was pretty interesting. That's a really interesting experience. And then I guess the final Google app that I had in mind was, and I think I made this one myself, was multiple accounts for Outlook.com. That's out in the App Store as well, or in the Chrome Web Store. Mm-hmm. And that's a Chrome app as well, but that was just so that you could basically use the web interface for Outlook.com, but you could have multiple accounts signed in. And I literally just like spun that up in like a couple afternoons or an afternoon. But again, that's an example of, I never wireframed that. I never did anything. I just kind of grabbed the aesthetic that I wanted that would like look half decent. I knew I wanted to hide things. I knew I wanted everything accessible. And I just pounded it out and thought, oh, this is good enough, and I shipped it. And I got I got a couple thousand downloads. You could check the numbers there. I'm not sure on them anymore, but yeah, so that was super interesting as well. I think this would be actually a great time to try to sort of transition to the next segment, because we're talking so much about pure HTML, JS, and CSS, but we really want to kind of dive into all these libraries and frameworks. So segment 3, libraries and frameworks. One of the things that I think you can kind of find challenging when if you're just like looking through, like I said, the news on web dev, and you're just like, holy god, there's like Angular, there's this, there's that, there's this project, and then you have all these other threads that pop up on Reddit and stuff where it's like, oh, JavaScript's dead, or jQuery's dead, or why would you ever use jQuery? It's even to us, it's very disheartening.
Yeah, and aggressive by some people.
Extremely aggressive, because I remember actually recently, and I don't have a link to it. I just saw it in passing, but I remember I went to like I can't remember if it was a Medium article or a Reddit post, and they were like, oh, we have proof that jQuery is dying. And it was like, at its very peak, I think it was market share, or market use. It was, I don't know the number, but like, let's just hypothetically say it's at 10% market use, and that's when it's at its peak and everyone's loving it and people are going crazy. It like dropped like something like 0.3% or 1%. And people are like, oh, that's it. There it goes. And it's like, you do have to realize that, because I think it was measured in amount of jobs that people were looking for. Mm-hmm. And it was like, you have to remember that if positions are being filled, like those positions are now filled. Like, you know what I mean? At some point, the job market will no longer expand for that particular set of skills. And a small decline does not mean something's going to disappear.
And not worthwhile of learning. Like, I would... just because it declined, doesn't mean it's not worthwhile learning something. I think sometimes it is. Like, sometimes that's correct. If it's some sort of like abstract framework that if only a few people use, but something as big as jQuery or something as big as Node and things that are fairly established and large, there's always value in learning things like that. And I think we'll go into that as well in one of the later segments. But you're definitely right.
Yeah, I think we'll probably have like specific episodes maybe on a particular set or a particular framework, depending on how much content there is there. But yeah, you'll see that all the time, and I think it's important. Another big one is Ruby on Rails. Ruby on Rails, I remember, was really big when we first started. Yeah. And then recently I went through a Reddit and everyone's like, oh, this is like, this is dead. And then somebody was like, well, these two massive applications that you probably don't know are actually Ruby on Rails applications. So, and you guys use these in your projects. So, you know what I mean? So, that is something important. Like, use what you need for your project when you need it, but do be in mind of the market. Just don't go too crazy with it, because it is just a very fluctuating, crazy place. A couple of the examples that I have for front end anyway, because I am a front end guy, the ones that I used and have used recently specifically are Bootstrap, of course. I have used Tailwind CSS a little bit. I've used jQuery, and I've used SAS or SASS. And one of the things that I think you have to kind of measure when you're going into a project and you're like, hey, I want to use SAS, or hey, I want to use Bootstrap. I think one of the things you need to do is kind of look at the pros and cons of each of them. So for example, I'll just kind of go through that list and give like the pros and cons for them. So, SAS, one of the major pros is that you can use variables in CSS. One of the cons is that it has to be compiled. So if you're a person that needs to just quickly, constantly refresh, that might be a bit of a problem for you. But if you're okay with having a compiler, you're good to go. And of course, SAS does more than just variables. I'm just saying main pro and main con that come to my mind. Bootstrap. So Bootstrap, for example, is quick and easy to spin up, and it's quick and easy to spin up a UI in there. But I find that sometimes it gets a little messy with the amount of classes that get added, especially on like non-complex sites. Like if a site's complex, a site's complex. There's classes and IDs and stuff everywhere. But if you're going like ham in Bootstrap, sometimes it gets a little bit messy where you're like, display none, display this, display that, and it's just a little bit crazy with the classes. Tailwind CSS, I can't really comment too much on that. I've only used it once or twice, but in my experience, it's similar to Bootstrap, so I found it easy to use because I have experience with Bootstrap. So that's just like a point of note. And then Lightbox as well. Lightbox is a big one. So I use I don't know, I guess it'd be just a plugin. So and this is something else I wanted to touch on. So instead of me just like constantly reinventing the wheel and just having a lightbox be remade, like I'd have to keep making my own lightbox mechanism. I literally use a plugin called Lightbox, and I hope I'm saying this guy's name right. His name is Lakesh Dakar, and though that link will be in the description, and I will, or the show notes at whatever platform you're on. But that like plugin I use all the time, and people will like. I mean, I haven't been personally shamed for this, but people will like shame you, being like, "Why would you use this plugin when like, you know what I mean? Like, why would you use this plugin when you could just like transition something in?" And it's like, yes, but if something's lightweight enough and just like allows me to like add a couple of things into the project, like a script or whatever, and then just like literally call something, sometimes it's easier just to do that. So, and then of course, Jquery. Which I think I'll actually let you cover, because I use Jquery, but not too crazily. So I think I'll let you kind of like take over, and then we can kind of have a discussion about our two points of view.
Sure. Yeah, so Jquery is one that I picked up a little bit later for when I was working for a larger client. He just refused to use straight JavaScript, and I had to adapt to using Jquery, which turned out to be great for me as a learning experience. So big pros of jQuery in my eyes are the quick element transversals. So being able to go to the child of elements and manipulate them, and going to the parents of elements and using the .find function. That saved me a lot of time. Writing JS code to do that is possible for sure. Maybe even will be perform faster, but it's just not smart to do because of how easy jQuery is for that. I think reading jQuery, another point, is a lot easier than reading JavaScript. It's more legible. It's a little more logical when writing as well. So your code then looks cleaner. The functionality is great. So those are the pros that I would say of jQuery.
Especially with Ajax, not to interrupt, but especially with Ajax. Ajax can get
yes.
pretty messy in pure JS.
For sure, yeah. The Ajax, XML, HTTP requests and all that, they can get to be a big pain. So the negatives, I would say, is a lot of unnecessary code is imported when you import the jQuery library, because you're not going to use all of it. There's no way you will. There's just so much it can do, and not that it adds too much to your project, but any little bit of code, depending on what your application does, could be a problem. The other thing is almost always doing it in JavaScript will be faster performance-wise than doing it in jQuery. Now we're talking like milliseconds, microseconds, whatever. Again, if you're doing something 1 million times, that might mean something. Sorting, stuff like that, depending on how big your database is, depending on how big your arrays are, you could go the regular JavaScript route, save some time, save some performance. And another thing is like those fade out animations, the fade in animations, not great in jQuery. I would definitely recommend just going straight JavaScript with just doing animations and keyframes. So those are my thought points on jQuery, but I don't know if you wanted to talk more about jQuery, Matt, or do you want me to I can go on to the next part.
I would say go on. Like I use jQuery, but I more or less use it as a substitute to JS, which is kind of why I handed it to you, because I'm not going to be that interesting of a talker about it. So
yeah, for sure. So then the other stuff that I learned along the way is some server functionality with Node. I think it's very key to learn right now. It's very topical. It has great extensibility through packages. Like the npm package manager is probably one of the best out there right now. There's a ton of documentation and tutorials on Node, so it's easy to pick up and learn. You can get some great REST APIs going. So, for instance, you need something that will spit out a list of ingredients for you based on what you ask. So you could send a JSON request to a Node server, write a REST API that parses that request, and then send back the list that you need in JSON as well. Parse it how you need on your website. So you don't bog your website down with doing some sort of configuration, having massive databases on your website. You do all that on your server, have the communication going. That's it. it's fantastic for that. I think especially using just the basic framework that you can find out there, like a million different tutorials that do like Express, MongoDB, Passport for user authentication, Handlebars for a quick templating system. It's a great framework to learn, I think, right now, and a lot of stuff is based on it. I think React uses Node for a lot of things. So I like learning technologies that then merge into other technologies as the stack goes up. I think that's really important. I've always done that. Like I said, with like learning straight JavaScript, then going to jQuery. I think it's important to know what that JavaScript is doing. Maybe not every line, but in theory that this jQuery is not running just that one line. No, it's going into a library and running like 15, 20 lines to do this one thing. I think that's important to know. So that's why I choose to use this approach. The next kind of thing that I'm going to look into, and I haven't actually looked into it, so I don't have too much to say about it, is a new framework called Vue.js. So it's gaining popularity now, and it's a direct competitor to React. And the reason that I like it more than React, and I've looked into React and I've used a little bit React a little bit, but Vue seems very easy to set up and a lot faster to get going with. So React is really extensible and has a lot of functionality, but I feel like React's learning curve is a little bit steep, where Vue is a little bit more manageable for a new team to maybe spin it up together and get going on it quicker. So not only do you code faster, I was also been told that Vue is faster at actually processes, so your code will perform better. So that's why that will probably be my next framework that I'm going to learn. And I would probably recommend everyone else to take a look at it as well that's listening to this podcast, because like it's very key to stay on top of the newer frameworks and the popular frameworks that are coming out. Staying on top of all new frameworks, impossible. But staying on top of the ones that are taking off and going with that wave, I think that's a great way to get jobs, to learn the best new skills, and to really participate in the programming community. Because you're going to look and see within the next few months, next few years, how many questions on Stack Overflow you'll be able to solve, how much information you're going to be able to get off YouTube for learning more, and then maybe give back to that community. So it's important to build yourself on a strong community. And I think Vue is going to be that next strong community, if it isn't already considered that by, I'm sure, a lot of people. So I think that's it for my side of the frameworks and libraries. I mean, there's for sure a lot more that I've used. I think these are the ones that I'm going to like, that I think will benefit everyone, and I think everyone should go in and look on their own and find their own frameworks as well on top of these, and read about them and decide to use them or not.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing I did want to mention was like we're mentioning all these libraries and frameworks, but this definitely is not the entire collection. And like these are the ones that we're familiar with, that we really like, or we've recently used. And I think like it's important to note that if you're a person, the reason why we're covering all of this, including the base, is if you're a person who's just tinkering right now with your pure HTML, JS, and CSS, you're fine. You can go do a bunch of projects. You could even go do some work. You could be a professional in this industry with that. And then with these, like we list the pros and cons, but these are pros and cons for us. You have to kind of do your preliminary analysis of your own project that you're diving into and make a decision. Hey, do I want to use Node? Do I not know much backend and want to use Node to learn it? Do I not know much backend and want to stay away from Node, and maybe I want to just use something else? Like maybe I want to use the grid system in Bootstrap. Maybe the grid system in Bootstrap is too fixed, and I'll go and I'll use something like Tailwind CSS. Like I said, I haven't used that much, but I'll use Tailwind CSS because of one of its pros. So like that's kind of what we're trying to get at, is it's okay to be sort of in limbo, but you should just sort of be informed about everything and ready to sort of learn about anything.
Yes.
And I think Mike would agree with this, that having those base pure HTML, JS, and CSS skills really allows you to transfer into anything. I learned and I'm not an expert in Sass at all. I have the documentation open at all times, basically. But I learned, I got Sass up and running, and I was using it a bit in 20 minutes because I was looking at it and be like, oh, it's structured like this and it's like this and I know how to compile. And so I just like did it, and I was using, and I know enough of Node to get NPM running, and I was using NPM, and I know enough of, I mean, this is from my IT background, but I know enough of it to use the command line. And so, learning those base skills, somebody who's using a library isn't necessarily ahead of you. Because, and this is something else I think that we learned in school that's really important, and you might have a comment on this, is somebody might seem like they're way ahead of you in a field or in a certain subject or a certain project type. But yes, they might be, but they're only ahead in that. They only know really well what they're doing. We've asked teachers who, were experts in, like, let's say programming, be like, hey, how the heck would I do this? And you show them maybe like a side project you're working on, and they're like, I don't know. But yet they're like a pure expert in, whatever they're teaching you, because they've mastered that in most cases. But they don't know, what crazy function you're doing. They don't know what microcontroller, in our case, you were using. So I think that's important, is you shouldn't compare yourself to somebody else's skill level, because you probably know something that they don't. Like you know it 100%, they know it at like 20%, Yeah. So,
and I just want to add to that, actually. Another thing is, like, we're talking about frameworks now and how it's great to learn frameworks, but like people say, and like we said initially, like, there's just so many, and there's so many conversations going on about how this framework is dying. Like right now, you can look it up and see that, oh, React is dying. It might be dying, whatever. But the point I'm trying to make is, learning JavaScript when you're learning web development is a way to future-proof yourself.
Definitely.
Because JavaScript's not dying. All these frameworks are built on JavaScript. JavaScript's not going anywhere. It's only going up at this point. So knowing how the actual internals of a framework work will make you much more adaptable to any environment. So you can go in, you take a look at what's available. Oh, Vue is the new thing. Okay, well, let's go learn Vue. Well, I already know how JavaScript works, so I already know how file reader works. I already know how all these other extensible libraries work. This will take me like a day or two. Where someone that went to a boot camp and learned just one like specific framework on top of another framework, like someone learned handlebars on top of Node. That's it. So just templating on top of Node with a little bit of authentication. They're gonna have a much harder time going back now and being like, oh, well, now I have to learn Vue, which is really, to Node, it's quite different. Like it has some similarities, but like it's like learning a whole new language. Where with JavaScript, you have a common language that all these things use.
That's a really good point too, because I'm actually on a side project right now where I'm working with somebody who came out of a boot camp. And if you're somebody who wants to go into a boot camp, and it is a good boot camp, ratings wise or whatever, I mean, like that's a good way to learn. But like Mike said, at least we haven't been to a boot camp, but from what we've seen from people, which is a very small sample size, to be clear, we've seen from those type of people is like they learn something very, very well, and then they kind of have trouble transitioning, which isn't really a problem, right? Because they are still learning, enough that they could do a transition. Mm-hmm. But like, if you do learn that base, or if you're just out of a boot camp right now, maybe you should start looking at the more pure stuff and see, hey, I'm going to make this, even if it's just a junk site that you're not going to actually use, I'm going to make this site. I'm going to, I'm going to make a really complex navbar, and I'm going to do that in pure, HTML, JS, and CSS. And I want to really hone in on that. And if you can't do it, maybe that's something that you kind of should invest in, because I'm sure whatever they taught you, React or Handlebars or Node or whatever, is definitely valuable in the marketplace. But like Mike said, being transferable is also extremely valuable just to yourself. And what if the job that you're in, they decide in their next project they're going to go to something else? You might be the guy who transitions so quick that you might be able to stay on the team or go to the next dev team or whatever, however your company structure works. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
I think, unless you have any other comments about that, Mike, I think we should kind of move on to the next topic here, segment number 4, which is when to choose a pre-made solution or a pre-made tool.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that in this context, in this episode, means like when should you use something such as a website builder, a service provider of some kind, some sort of software as a service or whatever software you're using, a host rather than hosting it yourself. And there's a bunch of other types in that category. Some main examples that we came up with were Webflow is a good one, Podbean, WordPress, just general templates on template marketplaces, using a CMS or using Card, which is another service. Mm-hmm. So like I said with the Lightbox, sometimes there's no need to reinvent the wheel, and you don't need to go through and remake all the transitions and all this and that, or even why make the actual plugin yourself when you're like, man, instead of me engineering this, I'm going to probably engineer it pretty close to what that guy has. You know, he's licensing it out, he's giving it away, or he's selling it. If I'm okay with using it and I'm allowed to use it in the project and have the right licenses, why not, right? Sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so that's one thing that's really, really key. And another thing to keep in mind is using a tool like this, especially a pre-made solution, which is often consumerized to people who do not know how to program at all. Typically, they get you running much, much faster than even for a developer. Like even if you're a dev, you have to still engineer the solution. Whereas, you know, whether you're a consumer or a developer, getting a website builder is such a quick thing. And so, like, if you really want, like, so I'll give like a more specific example, I think, to sort of like, to tie this down. So if you want to replace UI creation, so like, let's say you're a back-end guy, you don't know front end that well, and you really don't want to learn it for whatever reason, or the project is coming up really soon. So things you could use things like let's say Webflow, which Webflow is sort of the middle ground. It still requires development, but it's like a visual code editor is what I would personally call it. And it has like other options in there too, like they can host your site, you can add a CMS, etc., etc. So like they can kind of help you with these pre-made solutions with, you know, some of your own engineering in there, and they have a template marketplace as well. WordPress is sort of the same thing. So if you already have a host or you already have, you know, a reseller account or a place to put the site, and you really need a blogging platform, you really want themes, so like, you know, the visual aspect there, or you need one of the very powerful plugins that come with WordPress, then, you know, that might be something for you. Instead of you sitting there in PHP or God knows what, trying to make your own CMS, or, you know, making a Bootstrap site and then having to plug in a CMS to it. If you need all those things, really, why not use WordPress? Maybe there is a reason you can't, but you know, this is what I mean. Is it's a balancing. It's a bit of a game. It's like, oh yeah, I can use that. That fulfills all my objectives. Mm-hmm. Podbean support, or doesn't support, but they host this podcast. We pay for the service, and they offer they host our podcast. They give us like the proper RSS feed, and, you know, we can give that to various podcast apps. But one thing that's really key about all these podcast apps is that, or in this service, I mean, like Podbean service, is that you can they give you a website. So I can go in and I can just choose a template as to what my website looks like. And you guys can see that if you go to podcast.html, you can actually just go right to our podcast website. And we pay for Podbean to host that for us. And that's a pre-made solution that allows us to get our podcast out there. They kind of deal with it. We just make the show, and they deal with all the rest of it. Templates is another good way too. So if you're just trying to cut a corner, maybe you want a pre-made solution, like somebody wants a news site or a blog site or a media outlet of some kind. A lot of them look the same. A lot of them look pretty similar. So you can, and they're pretty flashy, right? So they take quite a bit of development work, transitions and the whole bit. You could just go to a template marketplace, go there with your client potentially, and just say, hey, like, which ones do you like? And maybe he'll choose one. You could buy that and customize it to their needs. And so you've cut off a piece of the work. And that's like a pre-made solution that's there for you. And then Card, which is spelled Carrd for the record, and I'll have the link in the show notes or description, is a single page site builder that has a free and a paid option. And that's something that you could use really easily if you want a coming soon page, or maybe you have your portfolio hosted on something like Dribble, or you have, maybe you just want a front end for your videos on YouTube or something, and you just need a real quick one pager. There you go. And that's a real quick solution, just like what we did with Podbean with I'm not going to go and develop a whole website. We know how to do it, but I'm not going to go develop a whole website for our podcast when I could have everything all in one, right? And so we use it too. So like, if you can use a pre-made solution, or if you are not skilled in programming and you need one of these solutions, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because at the end of the day, your client isn't going to care. They're not going to go and look. As long as all their goals are met, they're not going to go and look and be like, oh my God, you used like this old framework. If their site is working, all their objectives are met, and you've put everything together the way that they want, most clients are non-technical, and there's no reason why they would jump in and be like, oh my God, you're using this function. No one's going to do that.
And to add to that, most of our smaller business clients will come up and say, hey, I don't want you guys to reinvent the wheel. Can we just get a template up and running, and you guys can just edit that template, because we only have, a certain amount of money. We don't want to pay you guys to do the actual design work. And we're like, well, sure, that's quick for us. We get some money, and the guy that made the template provides a service. That kind of stuff is fine. Now, there's plenty of different clients that have come to us and been like, we need you to design a web page from scratch. Totally different story, and we treat that as a completely different kind of project. But regardless, like we're upfront with our clients, and our clients are upfront with us with what they need, and that communication back and forth will take you into a place where you can decide what service you want to use. What if you want to use a WordPress kind of service, or you want to make your own from scratch. I think one of the clients that I'm working for right now, they decided to go against using a CMS service like WordPress or Couch or anything. They rolled one their own, but they have a very specific device-to-device solution. So it made sense for them to go in and pay for that development cost to make your own CMS, because they would have to pay the exact same amount or even more, and have to deal with even more headaches to actually manipulate a CMS that already exists to do what they want. So it's all case-by-case, client-by-client basis, and I think it's very important to know that one solution does not fit all, and how to choose which solution fits which one. And unfortunately, the only way to really know that is by doing it and making mistakes and doing it again, and then doing it a little bit better, choosing the right one thing here, choosing the wrong thing here, and then manipulating it to work. That's the only way to learn. Like, there's no one shoe fits all kind of approach to this, but one thing I would definitely recommend is getting the requirements nailed down for each site before you choose any solution, and then going and being upfront with the client, being like, this is what I'm going to be choosing, this is why it costs more, this is why it costs less, that kind of stuff.
I think that's really important to know, or to note, as well as one thing that you mentioned there, where you said like, you have to just kind of do it. I think one way to sort of combat that, especially if you're a beginner, is really get the client's objectives nailed down. So if you're looking at using, one of these pre-built solutions, or maybe you're using like a hybrid where you're going to have a pre-built solution for one of the objectives or whatever, make sure that you have the objectives nailed down, because you were mentioning the CMS and they had to make a dynamic one or make their own custom one. It is like, seriously, in most cases, it is a serious pain to manipulate what somebody else has done. Yes. And if you see something and you're like, oh, I'll just have to manipulate like 30 out of the 40 things there. It's like, no. That's going to take you probably longer, just for those 10 things. Again, maybe not risk analysis, but like do your analysis in your project and see what goals, because every project is different. But like changing what somebody else has made to be relatively static or be generalized, like a lot of templates are very generalized, so they're kind of harder to manipulate in most cases. That is something that, you just be aware that it can be a real pain to manipulate what somebody else has made. Especially if like they say, oh, it's customizable, and the customizability that they have doesn't include what you need to change. Yeah. It is just a word of warning that it is a serious pain to do that.
Well, I mean, if you remember, the first thing that we had to change in that template that we bought for the larger initial client was the navbar, and that I think that bred your hate or love of navbars. I think it's a hate-love relationship that you have.
I probably should have mentioned that at the beginning. That's probably what set me on that path.
Yeah. There was a good probably 15 to 20 hours of you working on a navbar because the navbar that they provided did not meet the requirements of the client, and to put a new navbar into a already generated static site, a template is. At least for a beginner, I would say that's a pretty big undertaking.
Well, we had a serious problem where, and I mean, this is years ago now, so I don't remember it perfectly, but I do remember that there was a breakpoint problem because we didn't really understand breakpoints, and we were flipping through it, and I believe that they wanted to add more pages. So we were like, okay, yeah, makes sense. We'll copy and paste the buttons that are on the navbar, and we'll add whatever buttons. And then it got to the point where it was like, this damn thing is gonna flow over, and it's not gonna turn into a hamburger menu or a Navicon. It's not gonna turn into a Navicon mobile menu early enough. So it was like, how do we change this? But if we change it now, it's gonna change everything on the site. So now what do we do? And as a beginner, you're like, I don't know. So we were like changing font sizes and trying to make like hover effects and make them like inline blocks so they would stack so the navbar was extra tall. And I don't remember what the actual end solution was, but it was disaster. Like put plainly, it was a disaster for us. Good learning experience though, because I was like, okay, that's it. I got to learn navbars clearly.
Well, yeah, we had very limited time. Like the reason that they signed with us was because we said, oh, we'll do this in a month.
Yeah. Well, then there was a lot of late nights doing that.
The first version of the site was actually up in like 2 weeks, I believe. So it's a 15-page site with like. There was some documentation there that was exceeding like 15 to 20 pages of text.
It's really like confusing to me when how do I describe this? It's really confusing to me when you purchase, you get like a template up and running, and then like a client will let's say a client chooses a template, and then they need to like change a bunch of it. So that's one thing that I want to like kind of touch on is I said like, you know, do your risk analysis and get your client objectives nailed down. But a client will change their objectives. And that's not necessarily their fault. You know, they maybe their clients change their objectives, and you know, you have to be dynamic. So one thing that I do want to mention is like we did use, and this kind of did this did save us in this case, is using Couch CMS, for example, is sort of like a static website CMS, if you will. And that's one thing that you can use in a rough situation where the objective changes. So a common objective that changes is, oh, we want a static site. And then the next day, you know, every week or whatever, they call you, oh, I need to update this, I need to update this. Eventually their objective changes and they're like, okay, I don't want to call you because you're busy, and then you're going to take like, you know, a week or something to update it. So how do I just like do it myself? And sometimes it's one of those things where it's like they're changing something complex, and you know, they shouldn't be changing it ever, and you need to have that discussion. But then you could use something like Couch CMS where you're like, okay, I can now plug in this, and Couch CMS is a ready-made or pre-made solution that you're tacking onto a website, whether that be a pre-made one or whether the one that you made. And as long as everything's compatible, you could tack that on. So that's something that you should keep in mind, is you should try to always look for common changes and make sure that you are dynamic enough to change yourself. So you don't I think I mentioned this before, you do not want to lock down a static site so much to the point where if there's even an inkling of chance that they want to make it dynamic in the future, that you can't do it, because then you're in trouble. Then you got to migrate stuff or do whatever you need to do. And that's a big mess. So that's one thing I did want to mention there for sure.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, the Couch really saved us in that situation. I think there's plenty of situations like that where not only Couch, but other functionality, other services will come to play. So when you get into a situation, you're like, oh, I don't know what to do. Look up the problem. So for us, it was, how do we convert a static site into a CMS without having to change everything? Googling that gave us a bunch of solutions. We chose the best one based on the requirements, and we rolled that out. But many solutions are going to be like that. So don't be afraid when stuff changes. Just see if there's a solution out there, and potentially that could be more profit for you. Like for us, we made more money this way than we would have if we just kept it a static site. So there's always positives and negatives about change. Treat change not as something to be afraid of, but as something to learn from.
And checking goals off on a customer's, to-do list is like a good way to get called back as well.
Yes.
So anything that you can do, whether it be quick or not. I mean, quicker is usually better, but sometimes things can't be quick, and you got to tell people that. But that's, checking something off on their to-do list instead of saying like, no, this isn't possible, is a good way to do it. And again, to be clear, sometimes it isn't possible. So always do that analysis and say like, is this possible? Do I have to tell the client no? Or, do the check and be like, hey, there is a solution. I Googled the solution. I think I can implement this. Let's give this a go in a test server, and then say to the client, hey, I can do this. And there's a check on their to-do list. And then that's going to make them happy. So always be watching out in the marketplace for something.
Yeah. Under promise, over deliver, and clients will always be happy.
Absolutely. I think that should we transition to our brand new, it's going to be our weekly segment, or do you have any other comments specifically about pre-made solutions that you want to mention?
No, I think we should just go on to web news.
So we're going to hopefully make a better name for this. But what it is, so this is our 5th segment, and what we're going to try to do is every week, or every episode, I should say, we're going to have something called, at this time, Web News. And it's going to be a little segment where one of us, and we're going to try to do alternating, somebody does something, whether it be, a really topical news source or something that's really topical to us. So, something that keeps popping up in the news in a new framework or something that's like very topical. Or maybe like I'm just like hitting the ground hard with like a new, I don't know, WordPress plugin, and I really want to talk about it. This is kind of where we'll kind of like, gab on about, this is what we're doing, and we're going to kind of editorialize it, I guess, into this. And I want to have an intro segment for this. I wanted to make like an actual news segment thing.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, dun, 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 and then like the headline with the little like beep stuff.
Yeah.
So we're going to see if we can produce this up. I'm not promising anything. But
no, you're promising it. It sounds like you're promising it.
I'm not.
Everyone's waiting for this. If we don't have it,
already signed the contract.
Unsubscribe if you don't hear it in the next 3 weeks.
I used to say that on my other YouTube channel. If I like lost, I'd be like, please unsubscribe now, so you can like avoid the embarrassment. Yep. But yeah, okay. So this week we'll have Mike, and I'll let him introduce his tech news or web news topic.
Okay, so my web news topic is not so much web, unfortunately, but it does tie. It's okay because it will save you some time maybe in the future. So everyone knows React Native, or most people probably know what React Native is. It's a way of developing and writing code for both iOS and Android. One code platform, build for both. It's a great way of doing that. Now, React Native has its negatives and its positives. It's a little bit complicated to get up with. In my opinion, I tried to use it for one of my projects, and I wasn't a particular fan of that solution. So when I heard about Flutter, and this is a new Google framework for doing kind of the same thing, where you develop one code base and build for both iOS and Android. Now, note, iOS, you have to have a Mac to be able to build anything on iOS. Even if you build in these frameworks, even React Native, even if you build on that, you can't build a iOS app on a computer. So
on a PC, you mean?
On a PC. Sorry. So make sure you know that going into any sort of iOS development, as we learned also about that, and we had to get a Mac, unfortunately.
Oh, come on now.
Yeah, a little bit of a hey, I've been using this Mac for a good year now. It's okay. I don't know.
And we should clear that up with, we're both Windows boys. We've been using Windows literally our entire lives, so obviously we're biased.
This is extreme bias, and I'm okay with being biased in these kinds of situations. Not a big fan of the Macs, but understand that they are needed and are used in this industry quite often. So Flutter, Great language. It uses Dart, which is Google's actually internal coding language that they were developing and eventually repurposed for Flutter. So it has both Cupertino, which is the iOS design framework, and the Material Design 2.0 framework from Google. So you can actually build apps where it'll automatically detect that you're using an iOS device and switch your entire UI into Cupertino, which is really cool. And all those actual elements, like the buttons, the text boxes, they're actually built into this framework. So you don't actually have to build anything out design, like element-wise. Now, you can obviously build a custom design framework, so you don't have to use Cupertino or Material. I believe some companies want to use their own kind of design language, and they want to stray away from that, and that's fine. But it's great that you can get an app running in no time at all by just using generic Material button or generic Cupertino button, and it'll look like a native iOS or Android app. Huge advantage of Flutter in my opinion. Also, the Dart language is actually really similar to JavaScript in the way you write code. It's a big difference of it is, I guess, it's very instance oriented. So you write instances, you write widgets. It's very widget oriented. So like each little part on the screen can be its own widget, and it updates dynamically, which is a React based system as well. Like if you've programmed in React, that little, like every component can be updated dynamically. That's the point of it, so that you can make a single page application and have it not have to reload the page constantly to update a single number. That's what Dart also uses. It's a very similar widget based React reaction system. So I think if you know React, if you know JavaScript, it'll be a very easy learning curve for you. Like I made, not knowing React very well, but knowing JavaScript pretty well, I made a quick, it was a fitness timer application where I had, you give yourself multiple sets, and you set how many sets you want, how much time per each set, and it'll vibrate and ding in your ear every time that timer runs out, with a graphical indication of what's going on as well. I made that in maybe like two evenings without knowing Dart as well, like learning Dart from scratch. So I think it's really good and extensible in that way as well. And it's I believe just came out into beta 1.0. I think, don't quote me on that. It's either beta 1.0. I'm pretty sure it's beta 1.0. It's not out fully yet. It's still missing a few things here and there, but I think it's a great thing to keep an eye on. And I think that would be it for my tech news of the day.
I think I have one, I guess, question or compare and contrast possibly.
Sure. So
we in the past have used these type of things, and these sort of programs, I guess, have always been promised where, hey guys, develop once and put it out on 2+ platforms and whatever. Mm-hmm. One of the ones that we've used and successfully is Cordova, Apache Cordova.
Yep.
And I've actually even pitched it recently to a side project of mine, and mm-hmm. they're considering it for at least the introduction of our app idea. Mm-hmm. So I suppose my question is, what do you know? What would be the benefit or the compare and contrast between what we've done in Apache Cordova versus, maybe doing the same thing in Flutter? Like, what's the benefit, disadvantage of either, if you can give me that?
Yeah, I can actually give you that. So Flutter runs very much closer to the metal than Cordova. Cordova has to run through an abstraction layer, which has to render pretty much a web view for running your application, which I'm a big supporter of Cordova, and I use it in a lot of projects, but for a regular website or regular simple web app with just some static pages and some changing information here and there, that's fine. As soon as you get into any sort of multimedia sliding animations, I would try to stay away from it and try to use something more metal, whether it be just straight Android development and iOS development, or something like Flutter, which is why I'm excited for Flutter, because it actually uses don't fully quote me on this, but I believe it actually renders into OpenGL directly. So
interesting.
Yeah, so I believe it renders into OpenGL directly instead of going through the abstraction layer of like a web view, and that is similar to how mobile games are made. So mobile game engines will render right into OpenGL, and so you could write, in I believe in Unreal or what's the other one? I don't know much about it. Mobile game development, but like those gaming engines, they'll actually render into OpenGL, and they'll be able to run on both iOS and Android because of that, and that gives them the best performance on both. And so this actually piggybacks on top of that, and will do a 2D renderer inside of OpenGL. So instead of going through an abstraction layer, it'll go right into OpenGL. Again, I don't think it's exactly directly Metal, just like an Android or an iOS application, but it's very close to that. And from what I can see, the animations are all 60 hertz, like they're 60 FPS, like they're great. Everything looks really well, it runs really well, opens really fast. So I've seen it already, even with the powerful hardware that I have, that it runs better than a Cordova application. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because like we obviously in the last episode we were talking about closer to the Metal. And to be clear, when we say that, we don't mean Apple Metal. We're talking about literally like close to the actual chip, if you will.
Yeah.
Like the actual concept.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is that what's interesting about that is like that sort of sounds like it'd be right up our alley. Mm-hmm. I mean, the one thing I guess to consider, since we're doing such an analysis of different libraries and tools this episode, is one thing that you have to consider is, you know, I can take my web development experience and immediately apply it to a Cordova app. And I have to like sort of change some stuff. Like I can only have one page, and I have to sort of make divs that disappear and stuff. But like that's not a far cry from a website. Yep. Whereas like, you know, learning Flutter, it sounds like it would be a further cry, but you did say you picked it up easier as a back-end guy. I don't know whether I would be able to pick it up as quick, but that is interesting. Because like everyone always says like native apps are better. And I don't know whether maybe that's starting to sink away with the addition of all these like kind of cross-platform things, because I did make a Cordova app one time, and the guy like didn't even know it was a Cordova app, and we shipped it out for testing, and the guy was like, "Oh, this is like running really well." And
absolutely,
they had no idea. Like the young guy's like, "Yeah, that's a web view."
Yeah,
and he's like, "Holy shit! Like I didn't know that."
Yeah, general public won't know. But you can, as soon as you start doing larger and more complicated things, you'll start noticing the stutters. And I say you as in the developers. I don't say like a regular user using a Cordova application or not Cordova application will barely be able to tell the difference, if at all. So you're definitely right where you can build one code base, build for everything, or you build a separate code base. Like the advantage of Flutter is that you only have to build one for two, but again, it's not web based. That's the disadvantage.
Yeah, like that. Like that's interesting. Where there's still, I guess you'd call it a divide to an extent. In that, can you explain that in more in depth to a front end guy? Like how exactly, like, so what's your workflow, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. So what would you say your workflow would be? Like let's hypothetically, real easy, let's say you want an app where every single time you tap the screen, a number, like it starts at 0 and it just goes up. It just goes like 1, 2, 3 with every tap. Mm-hmm. What is like the general workflow if I want to start a Flutter app? Like at a high level, obviously, like not like going in depth, but
yeah, so it's like you can that will easily be done with a one function, one widget. Like they're called widgets in Flutter. So a one widget like object. So you pretty much just create a widget which will have not only the structure of the widget, so where it's placed on the page, the button,
right,
but what it does as well, the code that it performs. So it's linked kind of like together like that. Instead of having a CSS in HTML, it's all in one, if that makes more sense for you. So like having it like showing what it displays, like the actual text that the button will display, like +1 or something like that. Then having the styling of the button, like you've chosen a material button, then having the width of that button, all in one object. And then under that having also a function that it performs, like one, like the variable +1. Right. And then so you would have that, and you can link the widgets obviously using variables. So you can have another widget that will just display what that button does.
Okay, I got you.
And then again, it's all in one file, which is kind of cool. And that's how I kept mine. So I don't know the extensibility of if you make a massive application, how many files it would be. But I really enjoyed the fact that I could quickly make a fully functioning application in one file, having all the styling and all of the code right in each object, right in each, like the thing that I'm designing has all the code and the styling.
Oh, okay. All right. And then, like, how would you? Okay, so for example, like, okay, you make that, you make your widgets and everything, you're done.
Mm-hmm.
And like, let's say you want to put it on your iPhone and on your Android. What's the like? What do you have to do? Do you have to compile it twice? What do you have to do?
So Visual Studio Code, which is the editor that I use, has a built-in Flutter, or actually an extension that you can add for Flutter. So once you add that extension, you can build right from Visual Studio Code editor right to either an emulator or your device. So you just have to enter a command, run Flutter.
Right.
I believe that's the command actually, and then it'll automatically like download it to your device that's connected through ADB and install it on your device, and you can edit it there. And it supports hot reload, so which means that you can quickly edit something and then just press play, and it'll keep state the same as well, which is kind of cool. So let's say you're 3 steps into an application and something goes wrong. It'll get that widget will tell you what's going wrong. You fix the widget, it'll go back up and it'll stay the same. Like the state will stay the same. It'll stay like you've just went 3 times into the application, like 3 actions.
That sounds like it's super helpful, because we've definitely had our fair share of problem where we'll build a Cordova interface, and like God knows whether there's a better way to do this, but we'll have let's say we'll change the pop-up that shows up in the settings menu. Mm-hmm. Well, it doesn't sound like much to boot up the app, press the overflow button, go down scroll down to the right setting, click it, and have the thing pop up. Mm-hmm. But when you're doing that, let's say you're having trouble with it and you're not sure how to fix it, and you're constantly tweaking it to get it to work right, mm-hmm. or maybe look right, maybe you're just changing the look. It's a real pain to be okay, recompile, put it on the device, now check it again. Yep. Okay, do it again, check it again. So, in an application that has several steps, that sounds like it'd be really, really useful.
Yeah, for sure. For development, I only have positive things to say about Flutter so far. The only negative I would say is that there's just not a ton of documentation yet. There is quite a bit, but it's not that prevalent because it is a newer framework. It just got out of alpha, so it's getting there. But I think good things are in the future for it.
There you have it.
Yeah, I'll add some links actually to the show notes, so cool. You can take a look for yourself, and maybe it'll be like a YouTube video and another podcast or something like that. But I'll add some more information about it.
And it kind of sounds like something where we might end up doing an episode about, just this came to mind, but about cross-platform stuff like that. Maybe I'll do a Cordova thing, and you can do a Flutter thing, and we can kind of, compare and contrast on the show or something.
For sure,
just as an idea. That'd be kind of a cool episode, I think.
Yeah, do the same project in both. That'd be
kind
of cool. Yeah.
And just kind of see, and then we could have maybe some other content around that, but just spitballing ideas, mm-hmm. like this episode. If you like that idea, always be plugging, or what is that what they say? Always be plugging. Is that what the kids say?
I don't know any kids that say that. So
always
I think it's only you.
No, I've heard it on other podcasts. It's always be something, and it's always it's supposed to be you're always advertising yourself, but they have a catchy word for it.
Yeah, it shows how hip we are.
Do you think we're ready to move on to the conclusion of the episode?
Yeah, I think we should wrap it up. It's over an hour now, so hopefully everyone's still with us.
Yeah, hopefully if you got to this point. So a couple of things we just want to touch on, because we did cover so much this episode, is that one of the best things that we find that you can do is just dive into a project. Don't sit there, read your news, read your Reddits, and be like, oh my God, do I use Ruby on Rails? Do I use Flutter? Do I use Cordova? Do I use HTML? Do I do something else? Do I use React? Don't freak out. Do your preliminary research. Get your objectives lined up, whether it be for your own project or in a client's, and then determine what you want to use and just use it. There will always be another X amount of solutions for your problem, but as long as yours solves your problem, then you've done your job, and that's really all that matters. So that's one thing that we definitely wanted to kind of let you guys know. And it's also okay to not necessarily be using the best tool for the job. Using the best tool for the job is obviously the ideal case, but you know that's not always something that you can do. Or maybe like you chose the best tool for the job and a new tool that was better for the job came out later, and there's really nothing you can do about that.
Yep.
So you know that's one thing to definitely keep in mind. And you know, just don't freak out. Just keep trucking along, and hopefully, you know, your project works out. Hopefully, your research was good enough. Mm-hmm. And remember that a lot, and we've mentioned this before, a lot of clients are indeed non-technical, and they don't care if you've used the latest version of this, or they don't care if you've used the best function of this, as long as their objectives are met and their data or whatever is safe, or whatever your objective is, as long as those objectives are done correctly and are completed, they don't really care. They're not going to care. And in the future, I'm sure that their application will be updated anyway at some point. There's always a refresh for websites or apps or whatever, what have you. Mm-hmm. Did you have anything to add to those closing notes, Mike?
No, I think you summed it up pretty good.
Alrighty. So if you got to this point in the show, make sure you subscribe on the platform that you're listening on. Hopefully we'll be on the Apple iTunes shortly. You can also follow us on all the social media stuff, because we do have a bunch of templates and other content that will be coming out soon. You can catch us on Twitter at HTML Everything. You can also catch us on Instagram, Facebook, and Medium via HTML All the Things. And remember that HTMLallthethings.com is coming soon. The podcast website, of course, if you just want a direct link to it, is podcast.htmlallthethings.com. Now, we're hoping, like I said in the previous episode, to do a bi-weekly or an every other week schedule. And I don't know whether we're going to be upkeeping that. I think the first 2 episodes may release a little bit closer to each other than that. But generally speaking, we're planning on doing every other week. And then as we kind of go on, we'll probably choose a day, and then possibly even a date and a time, so you can kind of expect it. And, you know, kind of get ready for it and subscribe if you want to get on there. So we're trying to get on new platforms all the time. Thanks for listening this far. And that's all we have to say for episode number 2.
Thank you, everyone.
Signing off.